A response to Brigitte Empire, or a question of duality regarding satire is dead, is a piece that I wrote recently in response to Brigitte Empire's How the Boys Failed at Satire. And today we're just going to be reading the first half of this piece. The second half is essentially a demo portion that I will probably read at a later point. But to understand the entirety of where I'm coming from here, setting everything up, giving all the examples that you need, and talking about them in a theoretical way tied to the application of theory, you really only need to know the first half. So that's all we'll be doing here, and we'll just be reading it from top to bottom. This piece responds to Brigitte Empire's video, How the Boys Failed at Satire, or she effectively calls satire dead, referring to liberal pen stories like The Boys, but not really trying to separate different kinds of satire. The world is simply past it now, with Brigitte throwing the baby, Jesus or otherwise, out with the bathwater. If we're going to get out of this world beyond parody alive, she implores, we're going to have to build an alternative through action. This is something satire cannot achieve. Satire is rarely, if ever, praxis. Essentially satire, and not just The Boys, but all satire, as Brigitte makes no distinction during this statement, doesn't and cannot translate to action conducive to a better world, through praxis, rendering satire effectively inert. It's one for the books, and where my books, on Gothic commonism, draw a completely different conclusion, the opposite, in fact. When I hear this word, praxis, I don't just think the application of theory, but the development of communism. A better world, or as Brigitte puts it, an alternative. Praxis equals action, which I insist also equals satire when applied in duality, often through the Gothic, entertainment, and sex work. The argument for my response when defending satire as a valid means of praxis in the proper hands, read, not the owner class and those who serve them. Note, this critique is made in good faith, for pride, to try something new, meaning of someone whose work I respect, but strongly disagree with on this one point. Go support Brigitte's work. Our focus here is Gothic satire, operating in duality to liberate workers through performance. Power is performed, but commonly in illusory forms that many historically discount or replace in bad faith, e.g. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, which Kripke and Amazon parody as blindly as one can, taking Shelley's satirical benchmark, superhumans and Cartesian abuse, mad science, and breaking it for profit, exploitation which Shelley's novel fought against. The fault lies with them, not Shelley, the Gothic, or satire more broadly. To say otherwise feels like surrender, Brigitte's oversimplifying of satire a massive mistake. To disabuse her of this notion, I'll draw upon my own expertise, the Promethean quest, but also Amazon's, ludology, and Creed's Monstrous Feminine. First, we'll give the gist, followed by a setup half and demo half. Setup states my intent and goals as clearly as possible, while demo hopefully demonstrates everything in a fun and educational manner. When in Rome. Amazon's and the Promethean quest, but also buts below. Are you ready, kids? We're playing with power. Table of Contents. Concerning state vampirism, disclaimers, I think you've misunderstood my point, or my reply to Brigitte's. The gist, exclusion, performing power, reclamation of satire, wiggle room, and duality. Setup, hurt not harm. Commonality, and respecting Brigitte's work while dealing with Gothic doubles, celebrating satire in Gothic forms, or stating my goals before we start. Criticism and giving it, or the clause come out, a satirical horror's love tap when devalued. And we'll just be reading this portion. Next time, we'll be reading the second half, if we get around to it, a demonstrational response. Concerning state vampirism, this piece, essay or otherwise, is part of a larger series on state vampirism, as I conceive it. State vampirism equals feeding through the state mid-abjection, be it openly capitalist or Marxist-Leninist. These are largely questions of aesthetic, whose Promethean self-destructive function extends to other configurations of omolus, e.g. Zionism. Furthermore, There's overlap between my anti-Zionist work and my work critiquing Marxist-Leninism/state vampirism alongside Capital, so consider reading both. Abjection, which state predation and revolutionary action both rely on to function, i.e. on the aegis, as something to further or reverse mid-vampirism through paid, unpaid labor, me vis-a-vis Julia Kristeva, to that abjection, us versus them, alienation and fetishization, is one of four main Gothic theories my book series utilizes, the other three being hauntology, retrofuture, cryptonomy, showhide, and chronotopes, time-space, alongside smaller theories, e.g. Gerald Hogel's Ghost of the Counterfeit, and Barbara Creed's Monstrous Feminine, Gorgons and Amazonomachia, as I study it. As a queer sex worker and academic, I dialectically materially prioritize abjection and vampirism through unpaid labor, chiefly sex work as exploited by Cartesian dualism and its harmful maximalist binaries under capitalist realism, treating nature as monstrous feminine. But mention the other theories too. Access four main Gothic theories and paratextual documents for their longer definitions. In essence, capital, the state, rape by design, which unpaid labor prevents by breaking capitalist realism mid-abjection, i.e. reversing abjection during Little Gothic BDSM, rape play, when having the whore's revenge, which state vampirism explores at length. To break the profit and productivity motive by making a world for which it and rape are no longer possible using these methods, i.e. by using the same demonic and slutty language capital does, but at cross purposes. Source: Rape Reprise. Disclaimers. A response to Brigitte Empire is part of my Sex Positivity book series, which continues after its June 2025 finale in small-form content, e.g. essays on, and interviews with other sex workers, all of whom I credit on my acknowledgements pages and sex work page. This piece doesn't focus entirely on sex work, but widespread exploitation that includes sex work as problem-solution, i.e. in a shared predatory system whoring nature and workers out in highly abject ways. Disclaimer regarding essay contents: all opinions are my own, i.e. as part of my research conducted alongside my book series, Gothic Communism. The material within is written, speaks about public figures and popular media for purposes of sex education, satire, transformation, and critique, hence falls under fair use regarding copyright and free speech regarding defamation, obscenity laws, the Miller test. Click here for my entire series disclaimer. Lastly, many of the links on this page lead to my age-gated 18+ website, where my entire work on Gothic communism is stored and exhibited. Content warning: bikini-style pinups and cleavage, e.g. boobs and butt cracks, fascism, genocide and rape, police brutality and carceral violence, environmental destruction, and Gothic poetry and violence. Rape meaning, for my definition, to disempower someone or somewhere, a person, culture, or place, in order to harm them, generally through fetishizing and alienizing acts or circumstances, socio-material conditions that target the mind, body, and or spirit. Rape can be of the mind, spirit, body, and or culture, the land or things tied to it during genocide, etc. It can be individual and or on a mass scale. Source: Psychosexual Martyrdom. Concerning keywords, my arguments rely on various keywords I've previously coined, which here present in bold while color-coded, usually only once while stressing their keyword status, e.g. Little Gothic BDSM, Metroidvania, or the Palliative Numinous, etc., while some are given here in abridged form. Paratextual Gothic Documents provides all neologisms in full. I think you've misunderstood my point, or my reply to Brigitte's. This piece was an experiment for pride, trying my hand at critiquing someone I wholeheartedly respect in good faith. But I'm still a critic, and wish to explain my thought process before, during, and after writing response. Whatever I write, though, and however impassioned the words inside, they're ultimately food for thought. I'm a passionate girl, but this is meant to be fun. Are those mutually exclusive too? Satire is rarely, if ever, praxis. When I heard that, it stuck with me. I wrestled with things for days, debating the best path forwards. As I did, I struggled to process it, first recording my thoughts vocally before settling on my usual MO, writing them down with images, a return to my book series, which I essentially was defending by doing so. I thought to myself, maybe I did mishear her. I re-listened to the portion multiple times, and found it had not changed. I read it to my friends, my co-writers in said series, accustomed to telling me when I was wrong, which happens, and they also disagreed with Brigitte. So I pressed on, determined to write my Gothic apologia, a defense of me and my friends' life's work, and satire therein, an ode to praxis put to practice. That means the very sort of action Brigitte seemed convinced was impossible through satire. Satire can be action, but also includes whatever's being satirized, and to watch someone I generally agree with suddenly stand up, like Charlie Chaplin, to say that in that great moment, seemingly without awareness, but all the unintended irony at her disposal, that satire is rarely, if ever, praxis, and furthermore doesn't translate to whatever action workers need to transform the world? Let's just say it didn't land with me. And however measured I've tried to be here, I still replied, no, that's wrong. I felt that way when first I heard it, and still felt that way today when waking up in bed, as I should, satire my bread and butter, my green eggs and ham. And I repeat here and further in, that doing so isn't meant to disparage Brigitte. It's simply how academia works, wherever one is, meaning a sign of respect, one given when saying you're wrong, or otherwise correcting a mistake, one that is worth the effort. When John the Duncan forgot sex work in his critique of the exclusion of the unwaged, I told him so. He didn't turn to me and say I misunderstood him. He took it in stride, and that was basically that, though not without jokes, below. But when I sent my response to Brigitte, she had an altogether different reaction. I think you've misunderstood my point. No, comrade, I really don't think I did, though I'm happy to hear you out. Furthermore, I wasn't interested in steelmanning Brigitte's argument, saying something like, maybe she meant Kripke and the boys when she said satire isn't praxis, when that's both not my job and not what she said. Full quote this time. If we're going to get out of this world beyond parody alive, we're going to need to be able to point towards and to build an alternative. This is something satire cannot achieve. Critiquing power is one thing, taking action is another, and satire is rarely, if ever, praxis. The initial hearing of it felt satirical to me, owing to Brigitte's expertise in satire, but also Brigitte's insisting I misunderstood while stating her expertise. Source Skeet, Brigitte Empire, and Vanderward Art, 6/12/2026. I'm very confused where you got the idea from that I think satire is dead, or that the world is past it, which are things I do not believe, and I'm pretty sure I didn't say or imply. If I did, I wouldn't be doing what I do, clearly. To which I say, if we're going to get out of this world beyond parody alive, we're going to have to build an alternative through action. This is something satire cannot achieve. Satire is rarely, if ever, a praxis. This is a quote. I'm literally responding to your words, which I found confusing. A world beyond parody implies the world is past it, i.e. beyond parody, a kind of satire, but also statements like, build an alternative which satire cannot achieve, and satire is rarely, if ever, praxis, which again, I agree, they're confusing given your profession. The wording was confusing, and the conclusion. I could say you were referring to liberals, for example, but you didn't. You just say a world beyond parody, and satire isn't praxis, which is rather different than liberals weaponize satire for the state or something equally specific. I don't mean any offense here, but your argument at the end felt confusing and problematic in ways I wanted to critique based on my own work, not as an enemy, but someone who studies and performs the same material. Again, Brigitte insisted I misunderstood. How? The sentence and its application were straightforward, as I explain above, definitive yet broad, which is why I took umbrage with it at all, and one I quoted repeatedly while writing this critique. I focused on it, and only it, knowing full well how a more narrow usage from Brigitte would have worked better and not merited critique, e.g. Kripke's commodified liberal version of satire is rarely, if ever, praxis. But again, that's not what Brigitte actually said. At the end of the video, while giving the why portion, aka the speech, conclusion, and takeaway for the audience. Just beforehand, she points out that Kripke and Company's liberal bullshit well enough, but then counteracts any value satire might reclaim through workers by saying satire is rarely, if ever, praxis. Again, satire, and not just Kripke's variant, with Brigitte essentially framing entertainment and praxis more broadly as mutually exclusive, which I disagree with, the Gothic, of a rebellious sort, stealthily combining the two. Her doing so made me doubt myself, and where I repeatedly asked myself what Brigitte was now telling me. Maybe I misunderstood, or at the very least misheard her. The effect, not Brigitte specifically, felt Orwellian to me, trying to ignore, downplay, or otherwise defend the straightforward thesis in front of me by ignoring my eyes and ears, but also my expertise. If I couldn't call that out and defend my books and my friends, then I might as well pile them out back and set them on fire. My books, not my friends. Life is a series of stories that reflect an uncanny ability to change, but also discuss things with and without humor for comedic effect, nonetheless. I.e., regarding serious business, which state predation and preventing it essentially comes to. There's no linear progression from point A to point B, but a sudden finding of ourselves in positions of wearing the same clothes, but singing a very different tune, one where nothing, entertainment or otherwise, is off limits. It shouldn't be entirely a surprise, then, to see people from within the system grow to resent and critique it without pause, stating sans irony how they were the cyclical plunderers of capital's victims on a global scale. Cops, in so many words. Satire is still present, however straightly fired, and ignoring the Archer's paradox. You might see it from old-timey dudes stating facts above, or by someone in a pink Power Rangers suit, the disguising of a military attire and stochastic for the kids' varieties under neoliberalism, also above. Source screen cap top and bottom. Hiding in privates, our liberals aren't liberal, Disco Elysium analysis, and Martha Roots, word I can't say, other words I can't say, the cringe minister. I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1909, 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, I helped to see that Standard Oil went its way unmolested. Smedley Butler. A recipient of 2 Medals of Honor, and essentially, when he made those statements, was the most highly decorated Marine of his day. The effect is basically the same, confession but also dereliction of duty. So satire equals context as much as words, critique, and action. The grim harvest of state power and lies by bad actors overhanging things in museum-like ways. And games we play reflect that, on stage and off, though generally in between. She won't maneuver her way out of this one. You, stop dodging, what are you? Joyce Messier. I am the vilest of the vile, she says with a sudden flash of teeth. A traitor, a devourer of nations and infants. I am an ultra. Dios mío! Draw across. A liberal. These compile post hoc well enough, e.g. Disco Elysium, alluding to actual people as works in progress that freeze mid-interregnum when death takes them but also preserves them, while consciously aware of the satirical effect it hoards. The seriousness of the exchange, i.e. the story behind the joke, is no less grave or with theory, as well and truly played out. Mise en abîme. Per Gothic, it's a hall of mirrors prone to echo praxis that stacks, e.g. Rice's vampires pretending to be humans, pretending to be vampires joke, echoing Shakespeare's rude mechanicals, being inside a play, about a play, talking about a play, to their audience, then to Shakespeare's. Satire is satire, fourth wall intact or not, with entertainment an optional and flexible ingredient, but a magnetic and salubrious one. Regardless of the form, or its function concerning power is flowing up or down, such things are endless, and not so easily dismissed by blanket statements like Brigitte's. If you prick me, do I not bleed? Different points delivered by actors who once stand for this or that. Different things feed on, nourish each other during the exchange, one where fairness notably fucks off. So often whores pay the price, but everyone's pretending and playing to some degree. Furthermore, theater never stops politely at the door. Indeed, There's often no time to act, save to taste what's offered and respond however one does. Further allusions to vampires and my dealings with them bounce between books and real life. So I tasted Brigitte's offering to the public, and disliking her vintage, chose to spit it out, scratch her, and watch. In essence, I'll tell you what I think, openly and honestly, and if you don't like it, at least I'll know where I stand. Could I have asked for permission to critique her first? Sure, but is that really a critique when push comes to shove? I said I was good faith, not that I wouldn't draw blood, the first of which had already been drawn by Brigitte. I have nothing to hide as far as that goes. My aim to teach, first and foremost, and wake those up who seem asleep at the wheel. Sometimes the lesson hurts, but better a small amount of pain now than crash the car into a brick wall later. We're in the same boat, comrade. C'est la vie. My praxial emphasis remains ludology and Gothic castles, chronotopes, i.e. being half-real, dualistic, shared, and theatrically imprecise inside the echo. Excluding those, a similar satirical effect, transformation from within, can be observed with Frederick Brennan, Bob Ross, William Blum, Edward Snowden, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, all strangers to video games and Gothic, I hazard to guess. All doomed to become caricatures and walking statues stating things that hamstring whatever starry-eyed romance their eyeballs harbored at first glance. As time passed, they inwardly changed. Some outwardly. This goes for me too. Once a very different person in terms of my beliefs and what I said about them, only to find myself once more at the crossroads. The last time I was here, I was in another state during COVID and hadn't written my book series or come out as trans. I'm excited to give this one a look, given the last helped me shape myself. Source: YouTube community post Persephone Vanderwaard, 6/13/2026, in response to Noah Cadwell Gervais's an additional look at Resident Evil 2026. People change. The seats they find themselves in suddenly less comfortable than before, once bitten, twice shy. That's called growth, and it ultimately is what I offered Brigitte. Not to threaten her with hot iron or blocks of ice, like Queen Jadis to Uncle Ketterly, the magician from C.S. Lewis's novel, but a chance to rethink what she said and go from there. No harm done or meant, but I meant what I said, hurt, not harm. We're breaking monopolies after all, the state trying to take and abuse what workers utilize imperfectly for ourselves. Fight fire with fire. Everything sits within an imaginary cycle of history that plays out through an endless, genocidal mirroring that must, if it is to cease, be met with mirrors. Source: On Giving Birth. This includes my friends and I, but also other satirists versed in the annals of queer oppression and subversion, e.g. Leo Callion's own explanation below, also from the ancient world to the present. Shame is a leash, and it only pulls while you still want back in the room. Source: The Soft Revolution, unbothered. Not only is satire a praxis, then, but it takes different forms at the same time, i.e. GNC folk convergently and cumulatively satirizing straight life by simply being ourselves without shame in different ways, with monster being the value the state assigns to us to perform under duress as witches and similar beings to feed on, and who reclaim such devices while being fed on, to cryptonymically suck back mid-objection. As we'll demonstrate going forwards, this happens in duality while workers mobilize, then break monopolies upon ourselves, with satire, while far from being a silver bullet to slay capital with, still being an essential ingredient. Art, too, and sex and monsters and any other entertaining thing that doubles as code for abuse and surviving it. To abolish them is to castrate ourselves. To omit or remove what for many is often our only means of recourse. Any excision thereof is generally the work of austerity and fascism, e.g. as Del Toro puts it, at a time when people tell you art is not important. That is always the prelude to fascism. When they tell you it doesn't matter, why the fuck do they want it so bad? The answer is because they think they can debase everything that makes us a little better, a little more human, and that in my book, and in my life, includes monsters. Source: Jack Dunn, Variety. Del Toro, who's perfectly right, despite me thinking his Frankenstein movie was mid. That's our cue and calling card, all the world's a stage. Own that, and you own the means of production workers have access to, first and foremost. Used in ways Kripke and similar satirists don't, developing communism over time. Rome wasn't burned in a day. Perse, 6/13/2026. The gist: exclusion, performing power, reclamation of satire, wiggle room, and duality. Here's the gist, each talking point in bold, from the top. Brigitte excludes much in her thesis, and I get why. Exclusion for safety is valid, trying different routes when under attack, as trans people very much are. But exclusionary attitudes become harmful once they omit things that otherwise can do good, including satire, the Gothic, but also oneself. Brigitte's doing so frankly feels like a bit of a self-report and self-own. All the same speaks to my profession, Gothic ludology and activism, through literary criticism. I may as well respond, paleontology is in praxis, which obviously isn't true above. Source thumbnail, Eton Shays, Jurassic Park is basically just Frankenstein. Jokes aside, satire isn't zero-sum. It combines with different things, including media, to free workers from oppression, as Frankenstein famously showed, and which many since further hybridized to sublimate her critique, also above. Brigitte's wholesale dismissal feels especially dubious because it seemingly targets media at large, e.g. books aren't praxis, or something equally scorched earth. In isolation, nothing is. Cassandra the Oracle 100% correct, but completely alone. With me discovering that exposing what people already know, but choose to deny is praxily inert, i.e. when preaching to the choir, e.g. me somehow expecting my research into Bad Empanada to make waves among his supporters and defenders, when many had already been defending and downplaying his toxicity and harmful rhetoric for years, to the point where they, like shadows on Plato's cave wall, would rather shoot the messenger than break the illusion that benefits them, usually white straight men with beards and or diplomas. I've since decided to focus on different choirs to preach to, finding allies that aren't bad faith, usually minorities, though not always, e.g. Elliot Sang, a YouTuber whose work I respect similar to Brigitte Empire's. Thank you for commenting on transgenocide and calling it what it is. As a trans woman, it's so hard to get cis folk to take us seriously about this, e.g. me versus Bad Empanada, and those who will defend him until he goes after Graham Plattner, or something equally bourgeois status quo. So thank you. Solidarity, comrade, and happy pride. Source YouTube community post Persephone Vanderwaard, 6/12/2026, in response to Elliot Sang against transgenocide, and the TikToker who went to conversion therapy. Whether the pen or the sword, either gains their power through awareness and connection, teamwork above all else, predictive power married to play that opens the mind, and whose trashy powers of persuasion Gothic communism uses for dialectical material gain, namely universal liberation by defanging the state's ability to exploit nature. With cishet grunglers like squid tips above, pulling their weight and then some. Re just the tip, an interview with squid tips. Regardless of the registers involved, power is performed. People learn through fear and nostalgia as something to harness and satirically play with on stage that can transform the world off stage. Such things are always dualistic, the state using shadows since Plato to mollify viewers into passivity, then feed on them. State vampirism, states' rights versus worker rights. You don't break capitalist realism without theater, though. The Gothic sort home to monsters, inequality, confusion, and torture, i.e. of an optional and selective irony that frequently veers into self-parody, re. the boys. Those whose ignominious forfeiture to bad actors by good, whether steady or immediate, only cedes much-needed ground when performing power to reduce harm, dismantling capital the state as a system thereof, exploiting workers through notably escapist vectors. Already abject under capital, workers become alien and fetish in ways that induce state predation when unchecked. And yet because alienation and fetishization cut both ways, I wish to highlight how, regarding satire as Gothic, Gothic is absurd, corrupt, a place rooted in tremendous obscurity and decay amid power is up for grabs. It's a battle, a gorgeous row. The name of the game is reclamation, which happens through theater, often kayfabe, camp, and similar bread and circus, above and below. From Plato to us, literal shadows are things comparable to them, Simulacra, video games, the neoliberal, electronically enchanting variant of technological abuse that endlessly copied workers reclaim inside themselves, a freeing of the mind through play to enact change outside the game in question. Satire is theater, which incorporates comedy and drama on any stage. Duality simply means both sides use it, workers and nature versus owners and those who serve them, the state guiding thought, thus action, through the usual circuits outside our bodies, avatars and conduits themselves. There's no set function. Instead, they double each other, regardless of venue or form. The Gothic prone to routine monsters, paradox, and boundary violations, which my apologia embraces and defends, terror and theater being the instruments of the colonized, resisting occupation. Better to acknowledge that, and respond in ways that utilize satire's proletarian value, not toss the whole thing out and give the state their precious monopoly. Those who do may as well call satire degenerate and save us all some time. I'm not saying Brigitte does so here, but that's frankly the road she's on while throwing satire to the dogs. Thus Gothic, re Frankenstein and similar stories, e.g. Matthew Lewis's The Monk. A rather baffling strategy given Brigitte calls her channel The Daily Telegraph, and owing to her own obvious preference for satire, self-depreciation, and sarcasm, the former a clear imitation of Charlie Chaplin, whose own perceived abandonment of convention we'll explore deeper in. Nobody's perfect, but also there's room to work after getting hit to win the rematch. To remind Brigitte, the proverbial champ in this scenario, as gently and roughly as needed, how such things have more power than she gives them credit. So are Gothic and dead conventions par for the course, teamwork making the dream work, by bursting bubbles if required. Brigitte blew one. I shall pop it, not to dunk on anyone here, but remind her what works and what doesn't, and how Gothic satire reveals and conceals at the same time, when sharing the same stages the ruling class do. The colonized and colonizer share the same space, not just our language, but land and labor as part and parcel when asking for, then taking them back, e.g. me existing alongside the KKK in Michigan and Brigitte living on Turf Island. Use what works, she seems to say, while discounting satire, re the Chaplin refrain. I am, I reply, armed with the same basic tools billionaires abuse to feed on workers and nature en masse. When in Rome, fight fire with fire, land back, labor back, sex back, class war is Asp War, as me and mine tend to focus on. Point out the flaws, then go to work. You know the drill. We tend to focus on these things versus swerves, which TERFs usually are, my work combating either alongside trans allies in the UK, e.g. Ethel Thurston, who incidentally got me into Brigitte's work. Source image, Udita Chakrabarty's, my non-binary partner and I were told our relationship would never work, 2018, cited How About Side by Side with a Friend, thanking Ethel Thurston from Dead on Arrival, a polemic critiquing J.K. Rowling and Tolkien parties who unironically defend her. Frankly, I don't care about the boys, which Brigitte rightly clocks as liberal apologia, but do care about satire, meaning something my book series routinely and pointedly valorizes for workers, while stressing parody, a kind of satire focusing on people with educational qualities that punch up as states punch down. That was then. This is now. Our focus remains Gothic poetics, including violence, terror, and monsters, from Weber, Asprey, and me. See the Stated's Key Tools from Paratextual Documents. We'll cite various other things too. Gothic commonism, a holistic discipline. These citations regular for me, i.e. I like to cite them because I think they're productive, including violence, terror, and monsters, but also sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and similar trashy things. In a word, duality, but specifically dialectical material critique, one for which different usage of the same poetic devices dualistically share the same space, ergo bodies, costumes, and hyphenations of those things, on stage and off, what I call half-real vis-a-vis Jasper Jewel, but emphasizing fiction and non-fiction with elements of play bouncing between. See Little Gothic BDSM, below. Artist Aria Rain, cited concerning rape play, a 2025 note on my development of Little Gothic BDSM. It's already crowded, the usual liberal boundaries and refrains falling apart in hyper-real ways mid-crisis, meaning those for which Gothic readily excels, deconstructing power for new structures made from dead parts, scratching whoever to draw blood and expose the flesh beneath the mask and or behind the curtain, the scapegoat only in front of it, which will process deeper in. Capital's buffers have become noticeably thin under crisis. Effectively decayed, they less weight and more beg for the usual rabble-rousers to emerge and punch iconoclastically through capitalist realism, our Gothic continuum turning one's viewing of the world upside down, and all to protect those the state normally preys upon, i.e. unpaid laborers including not just care work, but sex work as the oldest profession, therefore struggle, e.g. disabled people often forced into sex work in ways they joyously reclaim from swerfs. Below. Setup. Hurt not harm. Before we dive in, I want to preface things with some setup, i.e. that softens the blow while nonetheless giving it hard enough to deal educational damage. Hurt not harm, and coming from a neurodivergent trans woman who tends to fawn and over-explain things. So I apologize in advance for being overly careful here, while still setting a good example for pride, i.e. to establish healthy bonds versus tearing down old ones. To it, I want to establish common ground between us, including how I'm celebrating and defending what I think Brigitte also cares about when giving my critique, the Gothic something of an acquired taste, and whose safe to eat label should be taken with a pinch of salt, below. From a place of love that scratches lightly when needed, then offers questionable cures, a bit like Don Quixote's healing potion for Sancho Panza. Poison was the cure, babes. Exhibit 0, source screen cap, LA Beasts, rare expired 80s and 90s snack taste test, cheese edition. That brown stuff in the cracker he's holding is expired cheese, by the way. Response isn't meant as a scathing rebuke, then, but comical reply that reminds Brigitte of satire's value beyond the predominantly liberal forms she centers on, which includes Chaplin, to be frank. To it, I'll trot out and show the audience various things, doing so in my admittedly oddball style, an acquired taste not above cracking jokes, above. As I do, context still matters. A given critique needs to mention any element of class, culture, and race that might prove relevant while still being honest and open. I'll do my best, then, stating how and why I appreciate Brigitte's work before critiquing it in good faith. No medex. Comical, which the demo side shall suitably depict. Satire has value through laughter giving us the energy to continue. Doing so however dumb the content being consumed actually is, i.e. bread and circus still bread, our daily bread something to take and energize for the long road before us. Think elvish waybread, minus the pedigree. Same idea with Gothic at large, whose signature oxymorons fight harm with harm in quotes. The purposeful quotes and irony a means of control through play as such. There's no ethical consumption under capital, but taking and repurposing something emergently, meaning outside an intended role to zombify your brain, is ethical. Raising awareness, and by any means necessary, a cooking approach my sister-in-law lovingly calls grog. Enjoyment doesn't equal endorsement, Sarkeesian, provided you consume in moderation, ass or otherwise, and educate responsibly. Commonality and respecting Brigitte's work while dealing with Gothic doubles. First, common ground. Why critique Brigitte, someone I clearly respect, when we obviously have so much in common, e.g. Amazon's ludology and Gothic, below. In fact, we're practically doubles. Exhibit 1, artist top left and mid top left, Brigitte Empire. Far bottom left and right, Persephone Waard. Brigitte's YouTube page reads, tongue-in-cheek video essays by Britain's least fake columnist. Sounds both truthful and highly sarcastic, as Matthew Lewis once did, followed by Wilde, Price, myself, and others. In my case, and borrowing from older Gothic auteurs, I'm literally a Gothic ludologist specializing in Metroidvania, BDSM, and Amazonomachia. Fakery is something to play with to perform power, all ideas we'll touch on deeper in. Something both Brigitte and I are guilty of when playing with the same stuff to achieve similar goals. The same goal, I would argue, liberation from inside empire. The Gothic is holistic and allows for this in duality. For one, sex is the most controlled thing in the world, the very thing the ruling class demand to survive, and which they tokenize through Amazons, quite successfully, to police state territories, i.e. whores policing whores in deeply turfy ways. Their neo-Gothic revival In the 1800s, under bourgeois nuclear models, seeing ancient Athenian propaganda brought back to life, which The Boys very much is. Girls get it done. In turn, duality comes into play when discussing and or performing these attributes, i.e., you scratch a turf and a swerf bleeds, no matter how nunly and or whorish she appears, the nun in whore's clothes or whore in nun's clothes basically wearing the same outfit below. However Radcliffean and outlandish that seems, it historically, materially comes about, and so the telling of friends from foes remains a routinely useful skill. Source screen cap, top and bottom, Evie Lupine's The Truth About Anal, and Angela Benedict's Goth Has a Brain Rot Problem. Function equals flow, not aesthetic, and good and bad actors look alike regardless of costume, with Evie being the good actor and Angela being the bad in this case. Here, cop criminal and or terror counter-terror are anisotropic, their function determined accordingly by direction as something to suss out, as I did with Benedict, a bad actor embodying gaslight gatekeep girl boss. One's body, like society around it, is something to fiercely protect, but also let different parties in for business and or pleasure, as things to indulge in while testing the waters. Here, a little sarcasm, fakery, and playfulness go a long way to challenge bad actors, meaning their Darvo and obscurantism, hero-victim contradictions, enabling state vampirism, cryptonomy, and objection. Good nerds challenge bad, sexual acts and asexual analysis performatively overlapping mid-dialectic and psychosexual ways, so the body and things that represent it and vice versa is both space of danger and play, grappling with various tensions and techniques, e.g. Amazons and anal sex, both weapons of state power, and something for workers to reclaim theatrically where it happens, i.e. making the usual violence impossible. Birds of a feather flock together, wherein I don't solely broach these topics, but do so convergently and synchronistically, alongside other sexologists, BDSM nerds, and goth types, re. Evie, above. Such is Gothic, the neo-Gothic lifting from the actual medieval period to reinvent the past, i.e. in Gothic ways useful through satire to workers passing the torch, e.g. mocking the church. Whatever the target, poetry is code and play that, however tangential on its face, allows for different ways to present and manifest argument mid-survival. To that, the state doesn't monopolize castles, Amazons, or any other Gothic monstrous feminine thing, or portal-like allusions to said things, above. Where power is stored and fought over, use them to smuggle and fire whatever weapons await at your disposal. Pass the message along as one might a fart or scream, to shock and awe, distract, disrupt, and ultimately undercut in duality our easily terrified foes. Leave your grail beacon on. Watch them shit themselves, dropping the mask of an admittedly bad costume. Such things linger as much through comedy as also fought over, conservatives recuperating Monty Python as much as the Wachowskis' blue pill, red pill analogy, each standing on Plato's broad shoulders. Monopolies are a myth. Attempts at monopoly are commonplace, steeped in myth. Become whatever serves workers best, breaking stereotypes the state reinforces on the aegis we both share. Athena's mirror shield, able not just to host shadows like Plato's cave, but bounce them back. As you do, always keep duality in disguise in mind. Goth baddies don't always wear the habit, i.e. any more than real nuns do. The virgin and the whore, a long-standing thing Gothic nerds cryptonymically walk the tightrope concerning, as all women do, trans or otherwise. The above exhibit should paint a picture as to what confusions commonly result when dealing with activism, counteractivism, i.e. among performers who, as people, so often look, sound, and otherwise act alike until push comes to shove. I don't view my criticism as much of a shove, at least not a hard one, and want to stress how I very much enjoy Brigitte's work, with her expertly marrying comedy and current events, while also touching on serious topics below. This isn't to hack her apart, or school anyone, and she's the one with the actual PhD, mine merely independent studies I call PhD, to highlight its academic value, function. But instead offer up things that poetically contribute collectively towards a larger goal, universal liberation, no scapegoats, no homeless, children, whores. Source screen cap, top and bottom, Brigitte Empire's trans women banned from snooker, and the forgotten transgender Epstein victim, 2026 and 2025. I don't want to confuse my readers, which doubles often do, as I lay things out, and do so in my usual Gothic semi-confusing style. Remember to consider this whole piece an exercise for pride, i.e. critiquing a good actor in good faith, using my usual tools and training as lifted from a time before the internet, as a medievalist raised on books, debate, and anti-plagiarism, i.e. to raise awareness of an intersectional sort. Class war is Asp War, achieving a Gothic maturity the state discourages to better rape us with mid-torpor. In keeping with state vampirism, function equals flow of power up or down cryptonymically. 2. Further reverse abjection, thus state predation. Doing so happens in duality per Gothic satire, i.e. as notably diehard, undead, and numinous during what I call Little Gothic BDSM, calculated risk, with an emphasis on rape prevention through Gothic parody and pastiche, e.g. Amazons. With Asp War stressing the liberation of sex work through revolutionary struggle, i.e. hugging the whore's alien, seeking revenge through unity, illustrating mutual consent with other abjectic workers. Source, paratextual documents. And Gothic maturity being the ability to say healthy things through taboo language during Little Gothic BDSM, i.e. while pushing for intersectional solidarity and consciousness, developing Gothic commonism, thus universal liberation, through various creative successes that collectively overcome praxial inertia, division, dormancy, and betrayal, ibid, with to combat various forms of reductionism, class, culture, and race, i.e. by building on Marx's notion of class consciousness, combining class with culture and race consciousness awareness to raise emotional Gothic intelligence while synthesizing praxis. Ibid, pertaining to Little Gothic BDSM. Restating my goals before we start, or celebrating satire in Gothic forms. Again, I wrote response regarding someone I respect on a topic we both celebrate. Before we start then, I want to stress how my focus here, however spicy it comes across, isn't Brigitte and exposing her like a Scooby-Doo villain, as there's less to expose, I think, and simply a poor thesis to dissect and learn from, versus a so-called progressive like Rebecca Watson, who when scratched was a huge dick about it. Rather, I wish to present Gothic as something to praise in hopefully persuasive ways, utility amid confusion, which trans people are currently dealing with on either side of the pond. The same proverbial boat. Capitalist realism sows confusion, and generally on the home front as fallen, up for grabs, and open to interpretations that hauntologically reify and send power up. But for a moment, especially when capital is weak, the bust side of the boom or bust equation, power is out of joint, displaced, and free to wander in ways workers might seize and use for ourselves, within contradiction and cryptonomy, concealment and revelation as merely part of the human condition and its language. Worker is other, woman or otherwise, nature monstrous feminine, free to roam. In Gothic, house equals prison, alien and vampire, etc., in bad faith, an unheimlich, something not merely to expose, the black castle under the white, or processed through play in ways that grant any side the abject, cryptonymic means to send power up or down, with black, theft, and piracy as much tools for liberation as not, below, model and artist Mauve and Persephone Vanderwaard. Function equals flow, and no such function to language exists in Gothic. Instead, satire equals camp as a consciously dialectical material arrangement, i.e. during Little Gothic BDSM, developing commonism in Gothic ways, and whose various revelations during Gothic commonism uncover this or that. To work within the labyrinth, a given explorer is much the minotaur as the maiden, the two indiscreet. Matter shapes consciousness. We toil under capital, as much as Athena's, that we're already trapped, and how to consciously improve our lot under pressure by performing adaptively the self-same illusions for ourselves, rendering others the dupe, Gloggins. Whatever confusions that result merely describe the reality we find ourselves in, then perform like the shark in its waters or pirate on her island, also below, our own infernal plots. Satire isn't mere consumerism then, relegated there for nothing else. Instead, whatever the gods do, mortal or otherwise, we take and respond to build a better world, i.e., with our own godlike power is camping dualistically the whole of existence in Promethean ways. It's kayfabe, giving us a puncher's chance that, however slim, should be taken and built pandemonically upon. Creed's terrifying powers argument, especially productive when used for the horror's benefit. Like Burns' Mice and Men, exploitation and liberation share the same spaces of play where power performs, and in duality among good actors versus bad. They suck, we suck back, the Gorgon and her avatars extra thirsty. Smell at the gods, remember? But also, we're gods of a communal sort. The very ones united in satirical rule in hell ways, the underclass fear and control through repeat bad actors, and their Wizard of Oz doubles, pimping Elphaba's clone, parodic dress-up serving whomever by directing power satirically to and fro in silly serious ways. Their humbugs, truth stranger than fiction, i.e. which Gothic fiction doubles while commenting on within real life, the playground somewhere in between. Pirates steal shit and satirize themselves as much as others, permeating discourse with the power that play categorically offers. There's power in that to subversively expose, transform in equal measure, theater, specifically satire and action, not mutually exclusive like Brigitte argues. She closes the straight, any course I chart, requiring it to reopen while critiquing the same enemy, the ruling class, but also their servants and whitewashers, who paradoxically paint it black in ways we might double and reclaim below, model and artist Cosmo Wanderlust and Persephone Vanderwaard. Despite Brigitte's crisis of faith, we pray at the same church, thus remain able to mask, dress up, and transform ourselves accordingly through different denominations that amount to more skepticism, optimism, or less. Again, power isn't simply guns, factories, and tanks, but a thing to perform and perceive in Gothic spaces and architectural embodiments mise en abîme, e.g. Amazons, to explore alongside the Promethean quest deeper in. A dualistic metaphor when developing communism, if ever there were. Criticism and giving it, or the claws come out. A satirical horror's left tap when devalued. Pleasantries dispensed with. Let's switch gears and let the claws come critically out. Big commonality celebrating something we both care about, mind you. Yes, there's reason to be hopeful, but also frustrated when someone loses hope in ways that frankly feel premature, i.e., we're not dead yet, and saying satire doesn't have value, as I and many others define it, is frankly absurd and makes me want to ask, am I a joke to you? And sorry to barge in like the Kool-Aid man in that respect, but consider this a love tap, i.e., from a satirical whore having her feathers ruffled by an unlikely source. It happens, and I apologize in advance. I'll be as gentle as I can, but as rough as required. Can you blame me? From Medusa to us, the state already pimps nature as monstrous feminine, and does so by design. There's no failure in that respect. For us, then, there must be struggle to a high degree, because the struggle is great and dualistic. This means correcting different wrongs, even when coming from workers we respect, especially those we respect, and double quick if they stick their foot in their mouth. Concerning Bridget's ignominious gaffe, I wanted to give that specific statement my full attention. I had given it was so completely wrong and steeped in my own expertise as all but needing me to weigh in. To that, I'm only responding to a short portion at the end where I think Brigitte delivers her video thesis, re. the full quote. If we're going to get out of this world beyond parody alive, we're going to need to be able to point towards and to build an alternative. This is something satire cannot achieve. Critiquing power is one thing, taking action another, and satire is rarely, if ever, praxis. Emphasis, me. Girl? Like, what? First, I merely wondered why Brigitte had buried the lead. Then I marveled at how wrong she was. Not from saying anything noticeably fash or in defense of fascism. I'm looking at you, flaccid calf. But more because she seemed oddly out of her depth. Ari, to paraphrase, satire cannot build a better world, because satire is rarely, if ever, praxis. The ensuing double take practically broke my neck. First and foremost, she argues how satire is an action, i.e. the sort conducive to, part of praxis, needed to develop communism, which a better world means. re the crux of my disagreement is tied to my own work, which considers satire action through workers, not owners. But some other smaller points bother me too. 1. This argues that parody is no longer possible in Trump's America, which is to say, monopoly capitalism in its neoliberal form decaying into fascism around the world, as global U.S. hegemony extends to Britain, where Brigitte lives. 2. It makes the boys' failure theoretically impossible, insofar as satire cannot succeed to begin with, or so Brigitte says, not really specifying what failure and success mean for workers versus owners beyond satire isn't praxis. 3. It presents satire simply as humor or the absurd that focuses myopically on single persons or scapegoats, versus systems of critique in ways that veil or lay the sarcasm on thick, R.E. Shelley's Frankenstein, but also her contemporaries and forebears, e.g. Jane Austen's truth universally acknowledged quip from Pride and Prejudice, or Diogenes' Behold a Man response to Plato. The latter, who wasn't past having his own bubble burst, and on topics of fierce debate, comparable to Satire Isn't Praxis, e.g. what it means to be human. Sit down, Dracula. The ancient Greeks debated this topic feverishly, writes Everything Horn. Plato famously attempted to define a man, using references from his mentor Socrates. He settled on a scientific definition, naming man a featherless biped, two characteristics that distinguished humanity from other animals. In a humorous scene, Diogenes the cynic, hearing Plato's definition, plucked a chicken in his home and brought it to one of Plato's lectures. When Plato asserted that man was a featherless biped, Diogenes stood, brandished the bald chicken, and shouted, "Behold, a man!" The same kinds of debates very much occur today, with trans people saying, "Behold, a woman," to mock J.K. Rowling for her own erroneous statements on defining a woman, to control that in all the usual Cartesian ways Shelley once mocked with Frankenstein. Is their doing so not praxis, Brigitte? I would argue it is. The words of such people tied to action as words, or as words in action walking arm in arm, i.e. on various theaters comparable to Plato's famous amphitheater, a place of play, an instruction overlapping different techniques borrowed from and by others millennia later. 4. Satire is something, described collectively as we, our, or us by Brigitte, that would appear to belong entirely to the ruling class. Satire equals bourgeois. Eric Kripke of The Boys and Matt Parker and Trey Stone of South Park, i.e., is that most banal of evils, pooping out bread in circus. Don't blame Dada for fascism. Did it ever occur to Brigitte or Charlie, Chaplin, further down, that billionaires use satire badly to serve their own class? Instead, Brigitte argues how satire, historically materially, doesn't translate to action, with her citing Marx's 18th Brumaire regarding the repetition of history and tragedy before farce, and me wanting to shout at both, "Don't forget camp!" Indeed, I borrowed and camped the phrase myself, essentially taking Marx's Lamentations and running with them. The tradition of all dead horrors weigh like a nightmare on the brains of the living. Brigitte just reads the original in a funny voice, presaging her own abysmal thesis with something written by another thinker prone to various mistakes, re. Marx's homophobia corrupting socialism at large, I argue. This didn't soften the blow, which bothered me once it came as much through Brigitte's unbridled confidence while saying it. I felt like she just fed me cheeseburgers in a can, above, source screen cap, LA Beasts, the cheeseburger in a can challenge, then called it gourmet seemingly without irony or laughter/disgust. I could taste her despair, which, while valid, ironically isn't praxis if it renders what could be praxis functionally inert. Satire isn't praxis? Girl, no. You're looking under the wrong rocks, and need only turn over those where trans people are to see fresh life growing, echoing post-punk after punk's demise in Thatcher's Britain. We're not dead yet, living under cycles of generational trauma, whose reclamation thereof, through violence, terror, and monsters, workers should defend. In doing so, we should neither let straight white guys tell us what satire is, read Chaplin as much as Kripke or Stone, nor convince us to issue statements they'd say minus irony, if that's precisely what Brigitte appears to have done. Remember how Chaplin's breaking the fourth wall and giving a statement that didn't target Hitler exclusively, the scapegoat, also didn't target the American side of things, and remains girded in the language of American liberalism focused on mankind. But regardless, it's still satire because breaking the fourth wall and basic conventions of theater doesn't preclude commentary and action within outside media, re. Austen, Lewis, Diogenes, etc. Doing so is still theater, thus satire because theater is concentric, and recursively so, wedding comedy to drama and their masks, i.e. is tied afterwards to material conditions nonetheless announced and addressed through argument. Chaplin's appeal didn't work because fascism was already in America under his very nose. Indeed, had started there first. He didn't stop it, and excluded many groups of people through his own accidental ironies, the white straight savior camping the fash, while largely exempt from oppression himself, though still facing it through poverty and child labor under British rule, escaping it in a rags to riches gift for the stage. But I'd never tell him not to try, nor say his doing so wasn't satire. We theater nerds stick together even when some understandably lack the language most people did in the 1940s regarding queerness, and speaking plain while in costume is par for the course, and still satire, my dudes. Such mise en bime regarding concentricity, speaking to different stories and devices pulled from the medieval and neo-medieval alike. The play within a play of Shakespeare's rude mechanicals in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Mary Shelley's frame story in Frankenstein, or the infernal concentric pattern, as Aguirre calls it, a Promethean device for undermining monomythic action during Little Gothic BDSM, re. Geometries in Terror, or traces of Aguirre and Bakhtin and Hollow Knight's Promethean castle world. I digress. No one's above critique. And Brigitte kind of stepped in my yard with this one. However, this shall be a friendly demonstration, playfully showing my Asp and expertise going forwards, i.e. considering how duality is a tricky thing to illustrate at the best of times. Satire only dead if the elite actually monopolize satire and Gothic language, read rapey supermen. They don't, and so far as exploitation and liberation, again, share the stage, and where this post shall demonstrate a lack of monopoly through duality as such. Duality equals praxis, because praxial inertia comes from those who stymie momentum. Trust among trans people and other minorities builds intersectionality during mistrust, showing others our proverbial ass, that anisotropically flows power down to workers, all while scratching our foes and shielding us apotropaically from harm. I.e., when the man comes around, show him your aegis, the paradox of exposure yielding the Gorgon or the Amazon's weapons and armor nudism in comparable scenarios and devices to suitably prevent harm in anti-predatory forms, where power is stored and relayed in hauntological ways, delving into puns, taboos, and various other darkness visible, from Milton. So the Gothic secretly teaches the reader while playing with barbarism, a tangent more Amazon shall take and run with in Promethean ways. Girls shit, and Gothic ain't for the prudish. The ass a secret weapon, scratching our foes and conveying different information in different directions upon its surface, e.g. moon letters on a full moon, below. Artist Persephone Waard. And lack of shame serves us well, except I've already written multiple books questing for numinous things, e.g. the quest for power. Here, and for the rest of my response to Brigitte, which starts now, let's have some fun, doing so where power stores and is played with in different satirical ways, queer existence and ontological, indeed, praxial satirizing of straight norms from Judith Butler to us. For Gothic, it's often silly and serious, not just Camus' absurd, smiling at the gods in Sisyphean ways, or whatever Prometheus does when the eagle eats his liver, but making us laugh, scream, cry, and or anything else, often at the same time, i.e. while raising awareness to bring workers together, sex or otherwise. This happens while avoiding class, culture, and race reductionism, ergo tokenism, a topic I've repeatedly explored elsewhere, e.g. TERFs and black moderates monopolizing Gothic. This requires including Gothic satire, silly or serious, in monstrous feminine forms, e.g. the canonical satire of the Amazon as nuclear dogma, something workers eventually camped, meaning in deeply subversive ways, conducive to good praxis and scholarship, and a subsequent action happening within daily habits, synthesizing this or that as preferential code. So yeah, that's the entirety of the first portion of this and all that we'll be reading today in this video. If you want to, you can support Brigitte's work. I have a link here where you can go to their Patreon, I believe. And if you want to know more about my work and support it, you can read so here. I'll also leave links at the bottom of, not at the bottom of the screen, but I will leave links in the description of this video. And if you want to, you can go and support my work. It goes towards, or rather, I take donations for my work, which goes towards helping sex workers, trans people, and other minorities. I currently take payment on PayPal, Patreon, and Cash App, etc. All links are available on my link tree. Every bit helps. All of that being said, thanks for watching. Brigitte, sorry, not sorry. If you don't want to be critiqued, then I would suggest you say things that aren't critiquable, because what you said was, and I hope I've laid that out clearly, and to a somewhat entertaining fashion, though much of the entertaining portion is actually in the second half, which I'll read in a follow-up video to this one at some point. Until then, thank you for watching. Happy Pride, solidarity in Britain, America, or elsewhere, and stay safe out there.